Okay, so the New York Times published something, and I need to talk about it because if I don't, I'm literally going to lose my mind. In May 2026, Nicholas Kristof, Pulitzer Prize winner, veteran journalist, man who has presumably taken a basic biology class, published a column in the New York Times claiming that Israeli prison guards were training dogs to rape Palestinian prisoners. I'll let that land for a second. Now, before anyone in the comments starts typing, yes, we are going to take this seriously, not because the claim deserves it, but because a lot of people believed it. It went globally viral, and the New York Times, the so-called paper of record, put its name on it. So we're going to go through this methodically, and with the level of snark it absolutely deserves. Let's start with the basics. What was the actual claim? Kristof's column described an unnamed Gaza journalist who said that while detained in 2024, Israeli guards, and I'm quoting here, summoned a dog, and that dog, quote, mounted him and, quote, penetrated him. That's the claim. One anonymous source, no name, no corroboration, no forensic evidence, no video, no medical records, just a guy told me a dog did a thing. Now, Kristof also pointed to a report from something called the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, which claimed the practice was systemic, meaning this was supposedly happening all the time on purpose as policy. And here's where I need you to understand the scale of what we're dealing with, because this wasn't some fringe blog post. This was the New York Times with a byline, edited, published, promoted. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it one of the most hideous and distorted lies ever published against the state of Israel in the modern press, and ordered his government to initiate a defamation lawsuit. The Times said the lawsuit was without merit, and that Kristof's report reflected rigorous standards. Rigorous standards? Okay, let's test that. Here's the first problem with this story, and it is probably the biggest one. The claim isn't just morally repugnant, it's operationally absurd. Let's talk to an actual expert. James Crosby, retired police lieutenant, canine aggression specialist, affiliated with Harvard University's Canine Brain Project. This man has spent his career studying what dogs can and cannot do. When the Jewish Telegraphic Agency asked him about this claim, here's what he said. And again, I'm quoting directly. It is highly unlikely that anybody is going to be able to train a dog to successfully commit a sexual assault. Highly unlikely, from a Harvard-affiliated canine expert. That's the scientific version of, are you out of your mind? He went further. He explained that yes, you could theoretically train a dog to perform certain physical motions, jumping, hip movement, whatever, but those are not sexual behaviors. They're just movements. And the actual penetration component, quote, I think that would be a lot more problematic. More problematic. That's expert speak for no. Here's why. Dog sexual behavior is not a switch you flip. It is driven almost entirely by olfactory signals, specifically pheromones released by a female dog in heat. That's it. That's the trigger. It is a biological, hormonal, instinct-driven response to a very specific chemical stimulus. A human being does not produce those signals. Full stop. You cannot train a dog to be sexually aroused by a human on command any more than you can train a human to be hungry on command when there is no food in the room. The stimulus isn't there. The hardware isn't wired that way. Now, Kristof actually pushed back on this on social media. He tweeted, and this is real, that at least 3 different medical journal articles discuss rectal injuries in humans from anal penetration by dogs. Yes, he said that. Here's what those papers actually show. Researchers looked at those cases. The overwhelming majority of them involved humans who forced dogs to perform sexual acts on them. They are cases of humans abusing dogs, not dogs being trained to assault humans. There is one case, one from Uruguay, involving a 6-year-old girl and a family pet. That is a horrific, tragic incident involving an unsupervised child, and an untrained household animal. It is not evidence of a military training program. Kristof used those papers as if they prove dogs can be trained to rape people on command. That is not what those papers say. That is not even close to what those papers say. All right, let's talk about what Israeli military dogs actually are, because the picture painted by this allegation is so divorced from reality, it's almost impressive. The IDF's canine unit is called Oketz, which means bite in Hebrew. It was reestablished in 1974. It is an elite unit, highly selective, of roughly 300 soldiers who apply each year. Only about 25 make the cut. The dogs, primarily Belgian Malinois, some German Shepherds, these are not random strays pulled off the street. They are purpose-bred, imported from Europe, mostly the Netherlands and Germany, and they cost around $10,000 each. Each dog goes through a 2-year intensive training program. What are they trained for? Explosive detection, tunnel reconnaissance, counter-terrorism operations, tracking, crowd control, attack on command during combat. These are working dogs with specific high-value military functions. They are not props in a torture chamber. They are operational assets worth tens of thousands of dollars each, bonded to their handlers and trained to perform precise tasks. The IDF lost 42 military dogs in the Gaza war by January 2025. 42. These animals are deployed in active combat zones, going into tunnels, clearing buildings, detecting IEDs. The idea that the same military that treats these dogs as irreplaceable combat assets is simultaneously using them as instruments of sexual torture is not just unproven, it defies every operational logic. And here's another thing. The unit employs both male and female dogs, both. The claim implies male dogs being used for sexual assault. But the Oketz unit doesn't have a gender segregation dog roster designed around assault scenarios. It has a mixed working dog population trained for combat and detection. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because this story didn't just appear out of nowhere. It has a paper trail, and that paper trail is damning. Travis Hawley is an open source intelligence analyst who works as a contractor for the US Department of Homeland Security and is affiliated with the Network Contagion Research Institute at Rutgers University, a group that studies how information spreads online. After Kristof's column dropped, Hawley decided to trace where this claim actually came from. What he found was this. The claim first surfaced in June 2024, not from a journalist, not from a human rights investigator, from an interview with the Director General of the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, posted on Al Jazeera's Arabic language X account. The official said Israelis made these dogs carry out vile actions against these detainees. That's it. That's the origin. A Hamas official on Al Jazeera. The post got relatively little traction on its own, but then an account called Suppressed News shared it in English and crucially introduced the word rape into the discourse. From there, it spread through anti-Israel activist networks. And here's where we have to talk about the people who ran with it, because the cast of the characters who treated this as credible reporting is something. First up, Ryan Grimm, journalist, frequently covers Israel-Palestine. He shared the original June 2024 Al Jazeera post, the one from the Hamas health official, and amplified it to his followers. This is the same Ryan Grimm who, when confronted about the lack of evidence for Hamas sexual violence on October 7th, tweeted, and I quote, "This eyewitness testimony on camera is more evidence than we have related to October 7th sexual violence." Yes, he applied a higher evidentiary standard to documented Hamas atrocities than to an anonymous claim from a Hamas official. Make it make sense. Next, Brianna Joy Gray, former National Press Secretary for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. She also shared the claim in 2024 and has repeatedly amplified anti-Israel posts that have drawn widespread allegations of anti-Semitism. Her X account has hundreds of thousands of followers. She did not verify, she did not caveat, she just shared it. Then there's Shael Ben Ephraim. This one is particularly juicy. Ben Ephraim is an Israeli-American former UCLA researcher who has built a large following as a prominent anti-Israel influencer. In April 2026, he posted that an anonymous Israeli source had confirmed the dog rape allegation to him. No name, no evidence, just trust me, An Israeli told me. But here's the thing about Shael ben Ephraim. He has an admitted record of misconduct. His credibility had been challenged repeatedly by pro-Israel researchers. And yet, according to Travis Hawley's analyst, Ben Ephraim's post was pivotal to the claim going mainstream. Why? Because it made it seem like Israelis themselves believed it. It transformed the story from Palestinian allegation to confirmed by insiders. That's the social proof the narrative needed to climb. And then there's Rami Elgandar, biotech entrepreneur. He was invited to give the commencement address at Rutgers University Engineering School. And he tweeted in response to a Democratic lawmaker's post about military aid, quote, "They've committed genocide. They're running dungeons where they train dogs to sexually assault prisoners." His invitation was rescinded. The claim kept climbing. And then Kristof, who cited the Euromed report and linked directly to Ben Ephraim's post as evidence. So let's recap the sourcing chain. Hamas official, anonymous social media accounts, an NGO that also claims that Israel steals organs, a man with an admitted misconduct record who won't name his source, a Rutgers commencement speaker, the New York Times. That is the chain of custody for this claim. That is what rigorous standards produced. Now let's talk about the man who put his name on this, because Nicholas Kristof is not just some random blogger. He has been called the conscience of international journalism. Bill Clinton once said, "There was no one in journalism who had done anything like his work." He has visited 140 countries. He's a Harvard graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, a former New York Times bureau chief in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. He is, by every conventional measure, a journalistic heavyweight. And yet, this is not the first time Kristof has been catastrophically wrong because he fell in love with a narrative. Let's talk about Somaly Mam. She was a Cambodian activist who claims she has been trafficked into a brothel as a young girl, escaped, and built an organization to help other victims. Kristof didn't just cover her, he championed her. He called her a hero. He wrote a column after column about her. He helped raise enormous amounts of money for her foundation. And then Newsweek published an investigation in 2014 revealing that Somaly Mam had fabricated significant portions of her life story. She had also allegedly coached young Cambodian girls to lie about their own experiences to raise money. The Times' own public editor at the time, Margaret Sullivan, said Kristof owes it to his readers to explain to the best of his ability and at length what happened and why. The Washington Post's Eric Wemple said Kristof's Cambodia reporting should prompt a full-on New York Times re-evaluation. Kristof's response? He admitted he could have been misled by sources, and then pivoted to talking about how he'd been right about the Iraq War. That's it. That's the accountability. The Columbia Journalism Review put it bluntly. Kristof had been wooed by aura and charisma, turning from healthy skeptic to worshiper. His belief in a compelling hero had endangered his allegiance to truth. Sound familiar? But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because Kristof doesn't just have a professional history worth examining, he has a family history that is, to put it diplomatically, complicated. In his 2024 memoir, Chasing Hope, Kristof writes, and this is a direct quote, "When I was growing up and other kids talked about heroically battling the Nazis, I kept quiet. I didn't want to admit that my father had actually fought for a year on the same side as the Nazis." His father, Ladis Kristof, served in the Romanian army in 1942. Romania was allied with Nazi Germany at the time. Romania was responsible for the murder of between 280,000 and 380,000 Jews during the Holocaust. Now, to be completely fair, Kristof's father's story is genuinely complicated. He was an ethnic Armenian born in a region that changed hands from Austria-Hungary to Romania to the Soviet Union over the course of his lifetime. He was later jailed by the Gestapo for assisting an anti-Nazi spy. He survived a Yugoslav concentration camp. He fled to the Soviets. He came to America in 1952 as a refugee, sponsored by Presbyterian Church in Portland, Oregon. He became a professor of political science, and he died in 2010. That is a genuinely complex, genuinely harrowing story. But here's what Kristof has done with that story. He has used his father's refugee narrative over and over again, in at least 7 separate Times columns, a memoir, and multiple videos as a moral cudgel to argue for open immigration policies. He has presented his father as a heroic figure who spied on the Nazis. And yet, when the Washington Free Beacon obtained his father's actual immigration documents, they found a series of discrepancies. The ship his father supposedly arrived on, the year he arrived, his nationality, his age, his place of birth, multiple details that Kristof had told the Times readers over the years didn't match the documents. And then there's this. In 1989, Kristof's father wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times defending Paul Touvier, the intelligence chief of a pro-Nazi militia in Vichy, France, who was later convicted of ordering the murder of 7 Jewish hostages. Kristof's father argued that in wartime, to do good, you often had to do evil too. Kristof has written extensively about his father's nightmares, about waking up as a child to hear his dad screaming in the dark, about a torturous family history that helped turn me into the kind of reporter I became. And according to the Washington Free Beacon, Kristof's father ultimately died by suicide. I'm not saying any of this to be cruel. I'm saying it because Kristof himself has said that all this shaped me. He has built his entire public identity on his father's story. The refugee, the survivor, the man who escaped both the Nazis and the Soviets. But the man who escaped the Nazis also fought alongside them for a year. And the man who built his career on moral clarity has repeatedly gotten the facts wrong when the narrative was too good to resist. The dog rape story is not an aberration, it is a pattern. And look, Kristof is not alone in this. This is a media-wide disease. Remember October 23, when major Western outlets reported that Israel bombed Al-Ahli hospital and killed 500 people? Within minutes before any investigation, demonstrations erupted worldwide, and then it turned out the rocket was almost certainly fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad and hit a parking lot. Remember the New York Times front page photo of an emaciated Palestinian child presented as proof of Israeli engineered starvation? The child had severe cerebral palsy and pre-existing neurological conditions that long predated the war. The Times added an editor's note. The photographer won a Pulitzer. Remember the BBC headline, "Shark attacks not linked to Mossad, says Israel"? That was a real headline. The BBC also ran "Shark sent to Egypt by Mossad." The Guardian ran "Israel admits harvesting Palestinian organs," later corrected to a practice that had been performed on Israelis, Palestinians, and foreign workers alike in the 1990s and had already ended. And now Euromed, the same NGO Kristof cited as a source for the dog rape claim, has also published reports claiming Israel exhumes Palestinian bodies to steal their organs. A claim that medical experts say is impossible. A claim with zero evidence, a claim that Kristof's sourcing chain runs directly through. There's a pattern here, and the pattern is, when it comes to Israel, the accusations travel at the speed of light. The correction travels at the speed of a strongly worded editor's note that nobody reads. So where does this leave us? A canine behavior expert says training a dog to sexually assault a human is highly unlikely. The biological mechanics of canine sexual behavior make it effectively impossible to trigger on command toward a human. The IDF's Oketz unit uses both male and female dogs as high-value combat assets worth tens of thousands of dollars each, trained for explosive detection and counterterrorism, not whatever this allegation describes. The claim originated with a Hamas official, was amplified by Ryan Grimm and Brianna Joy Gray, turbocharged by a man with an admitted misconduct record who refused to name his source, and was laundered into the New York Times by a journalist with a documented history of being captured by compelling narratives at the expense of valuable facts. And the Times called that rigorous. Look, serious allegations of abuse in Israel prisons deserve serious investigation. There are documented cases. There are credible reports on other issues. That conversation is worth having, and it should be had with evidence, named sources, and forensic documentation. But this specific claim, trained rape dogs, systemic policy on command, does not meet any evidentiary bar. It never did. It was designed to bypass your critical thinking and go straight to your gut. And it worked on Ryan Grimm, on Brianna Joy Gray, on Shayal Ben Ephraim, on a Rutgers commencement speaker, on Nicholas Kristof, on the editorial board of the New York Times. The next time you see a claim this explosive, this convenient, and this short on verifiable evidence, slow down. Ask who's saying it, ask where it came from, ask what the expert consensus is, ask who benefits from you believing without thinking. Because the truth is almost always less cinematic than the lie. I'm Aaron. If this was useful, please consider subscribing. If you disagree, leave a comment. If you work at the New York Times, maybe take a biology class, and maybe call your fact checkers. See you next time.